This video is sponsored by Skillshare. This camera lineage has produced some of the smallest interchangeable lens cameras ever made. In fact, some would even argue that this is the OG of pocketable mirrorless cameras. I'm talking of course about the Pentax Q, a range of cameras that has developed such a cult following over the years, with many photographers still maintaining a strong love for these quirky but incredibly fun cameras. But why do people love them so much? Well, honestly, that's exactly what I wanted to find out, because the Pentax Q craze was kind of something that passed me by when the original Pentax Q was released all the way back in 2011. Now that's mainly because I was a self-confessed bokeholic at the time, I know, hard to believe, and having owned a full-frame Canon 5D Mark II DSLR, I somewhat foolishly dismissed this type of camera as being nothing more than a novelty. Don't worry, you'll be pleased to hear that I'm in recovery these days and I'm quite happy shooting at f5.6 without even throwing up in my mouth. But anyway, this particular camera I have right here isn't the original Pentax Q, it's actually the most recent model called the Q-S1. So where did all of this start? Well, the original Pentax Q was released in 2011, as I've mentioned, and it very easily claimed the title of being the world's smallest interchangeable lens system camera. And it's not hard to see why, because even to this day, there are not many cameras that are able to challenge that record. I mean, a few have tried, and even now it's hotly debated as to which camera is officially the smallest of all time. Though the closest contenders are the Panasonic Lumix GM1 and the Samsung NX Mini, both of which are cameras I have looked at previously on this channel. But those cameras were just one-offs, whereas Pentax ended up producing 4 different bodies in this range. After the original Pentax Q, there was the Q10 that was released a year later in 2012, which offered a few upgrades like face detection AF, a faster burst rate, and a slightly better battery life. Then, a year after that, Pentax decided to just completely rip up the rulebook on naming conventions for some reason and released the Q7 before finally releasing this, the Q-S1, in 2014. Now, arguably the biggest change made to the most recent editions, the Q7 and this Q-S1, was that Pentax added a slightly larger sensor. And when I say slightly larger, I need to underline the word slightly, because they basically switched out from using a 1/2.3-inch sensor to a 1/1.7-inch sensor, meaning that the chip upgrade is about 1.3 millimeters taller and 1 millimeter wider. So about the same size as mine. Did you know though, that few extra millimeters was still enough to reduce the crop factor quite significantly. The original Q and Q10 had a crop factor of 5.6 times, whilst the crop on the Q7 and this Q-S1 was reduced to 4.6 times. Now granted, that is still quite a substantial crop, but it certainly does make a difference when picking lenses, particularly if you like to shoot wide. And as you'll see a little bit later on, this small sensor does have some rather unusual advantages, as well as some fairly predictable cons. Now, one of the reasons why Pentax was able to make these cameras just so small, whilst also making them fairly feature-laden, was due to them favouring the smaller compact size sensor. But this decision also created a number of marketing challenges, as these cameras were going up against the likes of Sony, Canon, Fujifilm, Olympus and Panasonic, all of whom opted to use larger 4/3 and APS-C size chips in their first run of mirrorless cameras. I mean, even the original Nikon 1 series, which was somewhat ridiculed at the time for using a 1-inch sensor, appears pretty big when placed side by side with this one. Tiny eye, too tiny, but the beam. So considering this, why did these cameras still manage to amass such a cult following? Well, its pocketable size was clearly one thing, because in comparison to DSLRs at the time, this was absolutely miniature, but I also believe it was down to its unique and fun design. Unlike its rivals, this camera wasn't aimed at the professional or even semi-professional markets. It was made predominantly for the casual shooter who was looking to upgrade from a compact point and shoot. This allowed Pentax to just have some fun with this release, and they actually put a lot of effort into creating these cameras in a whole range of different color combinations. I specifically remember that the Q10 in particular offered over 100 different custom color options that you could choose from when you ordered the camera directly from the Pentax website. Unfortunately, this color range selection was eventually reined back slightly with later versions, but I just love how Pentax completely leaned into this wacky level of customizability. And as a result, even today, it makes shopping for these cameras on the secondhand market a lot more fun, as you never quite know what you're going to find, and some of the color combos are certainly very eye-catching. Now, speaking of eye-catching, that reminds me that I've recently been trying to improve my composition skills when it comes to capturing street photography, and I've mainly been doing that with the help of Craig Whitehead's Street Photography Composition course, which is available to view on Skillshare, who are also today's sponsors. Now, if you didn't already know, Skillshare is one of the largest online learning communities for creatives, and there are thousands of courses that are led by industry experts, not only covering the field of photography, but many other topics as well, such as illustration, design, productivity, and even how to be a competent YouTuber. YouTuber. Maybe I should watch that course at some point. Anyway, Craig is an insanely talented street photographer and definitely has an eye for composition, and he's also from the UK like me, so I can highly recommend his course if you are looking for new and inspiring ways to level up your own street photography game. Throughout his course, you'll join him as he deep dives through his own portfolio, analysing what it is exactly that makes eye-catching shots and how you can apply those techniques to your own work. And to get you started, the first 500 people to use the link in the description below will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so why not join today and take a look at Craig's course for yourself. And thanks again to Skillshare for supporting the channel by sponsoring this video. Now, despite this being miniature in size, it's certainly far from lacking in features. In fact, it's pretty wild just how many things they've managed to pack into this. Starting with the fundamentals, on the top there's a dedicated mode dial with all of the shooting modes you'd expect, well, except for one. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that there's a BC mode, and this stands for blur control. One of the downsides to using a smaller sensor is that it becomes much harder to create a shallow depth of field, or that background blur effect that people often associate with professional photography. And as a slight side note, if you want to learn more about that topic and the advantages and disadvantages of using small sensors versus larger ones, be sure to open up this video up here in a new tab and watch it after this video. Anyway, shooting in this BC mode allows the camera to fake this background blur effect, and it basically works by taking multiple photos at different focal positions and then merging them all together in camera. Now, obviously the final result can only be output in JPEG, and the results are mid. But if you really can't live without that shallow depth of field look, then I would just suggest getting something with a larger sensor like the Panasonic GM1. Anyway, next to the mode dial is the main and only command dial on this camera. And because there's only one dial, if you are shooting in manual mode, for example, and you want to switch between adjusting the aperture and shutter speed, you can simply do this by pressing this button here, which is well within reach of your thumb. Now, if you know me, you know I hand out extra points for cameras that have a dedicated exposure compensation dial, and that's because I mainly shoot in aperture priority mode and I use that feature a lot. Well, although there's not a dedicated dial per se, by pressing this button in aperture priority mode, this command dial will go from altering the aperture to adjusting exposure compensation, which I think is so simple but absolutely genius. Now, as you can see, there are plenty of dedicated buttons on the back here for adjusting the core settings like ISO, white balance, drive modes, etc. But if you press this info button, it'll bring up a much more detailed list of options, which means that practically everything you'd ever need can be adjusted with just a few button presses, which is very convenient. Though if that wasn't enough for you, there's also this dial on the front here, which can be customized to toggle between a few different options, including filter effects, different aspect ratios, focusing modes, and more. On the back, there's a large 3-inch screen, though unfortunately it's not touch sensitive and it is fixed in place. And as I found out while shooting on a very sunny day in London, this can be a little bit hard to see in super bright conditions. And without a built-in EVF, you are pretty much forced to just make the most of it when composing your shots. That said, one thing this camera offers that most of its competitors don't is it has a full-size hot shoe port for adding a flash or other accessories, which is pretty impressive. And it also has one of possibly the coolest pop-up flashes I've ever seen, and this can either be fired in this upright position or it can be closed down and fired in the dormant position as well. Now, you've probably already spotted this weird dial looking thing on the front. Well, this isn't actually a dial, it's actually a front-facing infrared port for firing the camera remotely using an IR remote accessory. But it also has a secondary purpose as it acts as a small grip, and I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but regardless, it works surprisingly well. Another slightly weird design choice that I haven't seen before is to have a side-mounted battery slot. And actually, I really like this because it means that you don't have the battery access issues that you do with other cameras when this is mounted to a tripod. On the opposite side of the camera, you'll find an SD card slot, and thankfully they made space to fit in a full-sized SD card slot because some of its competitors like the Samsung NX Mini and the Nikon 1 series all decided to compromise and make use of micro SD cards instead, which obviously have their limitations in terms of write speed. Speaking of write speeds, this thing can capture images up to 5 frames per second using the mechanical shutter, though there is a fairly big asterisk next to that statement because this setting is restricted to JPEG only, and after just 5 shots, the buffer will completely fill and grind everything to a halt. Now, if you switch over to the low speed burst mode, you can then capture photos in RAW. However, this is at a very pedestrian 1.5 frames per second, and again, after just 5 shots, everything stops. I also found that you can't access the settings menu whilst the images are being written to the card, so this really isn't something that's worth bothering with in my opinion. I did say this is a camera not aimed at professionals. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that this has a mechanical shutter, but when I showed you the sensor earlier, you might have been wondering, where is it? Well, due to space limitations inside the camera, Pentax decided to instead place leaf shutters within the lenses themselves. And if that wasn't cool enough for you, some of these lenses, including including this 5 to 15mm kit lens that I've been using, actually include a built-in ND filter in the lens as well, which can be activated via the camera, which I think is absolutely genius. Oh, and one other thing I've forgotten to mention is the fact that this camera actually has sensor shift stabilization too, which is not only handy for gaining shake-free shots when taking photos, but you can also use this in combination with the video record mode as well. And yes, this can capture video as well, though as you would expect from a camera of this vintage, the options are very limited, maxing out at 1080 HD up to 30 frames per second. And despite there being a full-sized hot shoe port, there's no headphone or mic port, so you are pretty much stuck to using the built-in microphone on the front here. Now, while staying on the topic of slight downsides, because this camera system was fairly short-lived, Pentax only ever had time to release 8 lenses in total for this lens mount, which were numbered 1 through 8. And because of this, these have somewhat become collector's items for Pentax enthusiasts, which means that some of the less common choices can fetch pretty high prices online. And as I was personally shopping to a budget, I had to settle with just using this 5 to 15mm kit lens that came included with the camera that I bought, which in full frame terms offers an equivalent field of view to something like a 23 to 70mm lens on a full frame camera, meaning that actually it's pretty capable in most scenarios. Now, for a kit lens, the image quality really isn't all that bad, and I do love how small and lightweight this lens is. Plus, the AF was pretty quick, quiet, and accurate too, which was a pleasant surprise. But the one thing that makes this camera just so interesting to me is that because the sensor is so small and it has such a short flange distance, it's one of the only digital cameras that is compatible with vintage D-mount lenses from 8mm film cine cameras. And because not many people use 8mm film cine cameras anymore, these lenses can be found in abundance online and they're relatively cheap to buy. But as an extra tip, I found that if you search for 8mm cameras instead, you can often buy a D-mount cine cam with a lens attached for around the same price, or in my case, a little bit cheaper than just buying the lens by itself. After that, all you need is a Pentax Q to D-mount adapter, which can also be found on eBay for just a few quid, and then you're all ready to go. Now, the final results you capture using these vintage lenses will vary dramatically depending on what you buy and obviously the condition the lens comes in. So was the lens that I bought sharp? Good one. But hey, it certainly gives the photos a very soft and dreamy nostalgic feel, which I kind of like. And besides, using vintage glass really isn't about achieving the pinnacle of image quality. It's the unique characteristics and optical imperfections that make them so fun to use, well, for me at least. And considering that I got this adapter, the lens, and this cool vintage camera all for just under £22, which is around $28, I really can't complain. Lenses aside though, this 12.4 megapixel sensor does start to show its age when editing the raw files. And I did start to notice a fair amount of noise creeping in when I started to toy with the shadows and highlights. Now, obviously one of the common downsides to using a smaller sensor is poor low light performance. And as you can see here, this camera is really no exception to that rule. So if this type of noise issue bothers you, I would recommend pairing this camera with one of the faster primes that are available and just do your best to keep the ISO locked to 100. But despite these limitations, I honestly still think this is an incredibly competent and fun camera to use. And it would be particularly well suited for casual snappers and street photographers looking for something that's portable, functional, yet fashionable.